Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahi Tejasvinavaditam Astoma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Namostute Vyasa Vishala Bhute Pula Ravindayata Putra Nitra Yena Taya Bharata Talya Purna Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapana Parijayataya Totra Vetraika Panaya Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha. Salutations to thee, O Vyasa, of profound intellect and with eyes like the petals of a full-blown lotus, by whom the lamp of knowledge filled with the oil of the Mahabharata has been lighted. And salutations to Krishna, the Parijata, or the Kalpataru, the wish-fulfilling entity, the bestower of all desires of those who take refuge in him, the holder of the staff or the cane in one hand, representing justice, and the holder of the symbol of knowledge in the other, and the milker of the Gita, nectar. And then Sarvo Panishado Gavo Dugdha Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsaha Sutir Bhukta Dugtam Gitamrita Mahat. The famous, all Upanishads are the cows. The milker is Krishna, the cowherd boy, and Partha is the calf. Men of purified intellect are the drinkers, and the milk is the supreme nectar of this Gita. We salute Lord Krishna, world teacher, son of Vasudeva, destroyer of Kamsa and Chanara, the supreme bliss of Devaki. Now, we are on the second chapter here, and we just started this last week, so review some of the things that we covered. Just briefly, we started off, of course, with chapter 1. Chapter 1 tells us of the importance of despondency, depression. In Arjun's case, it's more than depression. It's a nervous breakdown. All the symptoms are there, shaking, he can hardly hold his bow, and all his military skills seem to have been put on hold because his self-confidence went down. In the second chapter, we see how the formula to revive anybody's self-confidence is brought about, and certainly by some techniques. But we have to be sure of something. In the second chapter, the Bhagavad Gita points us out, a very important part of the Bhagavad Gita. And that is to say that we should have a level of self-confidence on the basis of our uniqueness. So I may have mentioned before, and I continue to mention, that we're individual. That may seem obvious, but really it's not so obvious. When we look at the biological species, we seem to think that each one is just a carbon copy of the other. And in simple life forms, it's not easy to pick up any difference. Ants, for example, in a line, are just ants in a line, the standard kind of body, a head, a kind of middle section and a tail section, abdominal section and a tail section. And so when we see an ant, we don't really see any difference between ant number 1 and ant number 2 or 1,000. But the human is a bit different. The individual is expressed by a unique set of DNA characteristics. And when we look at our fingerprints, we see that they're entirely different from another person's. They were never seen before we were born. They'll never be seen again when we die. And that means that we fit in to a divine arrangement in some way. When people first come and get introduced to the subject of Vedanta or have some kind of personal problem, I ask people to look at life in a different way, not a standard way. The standard way will be to see life as me posed in a field of endeavor against other people, places, and events, and I have to struggle. In fact, biological evolution tells us that we have to struggle. survival of the fittest. That as long as I can overcome my neighbor and be more competitive, then I will win in this game and race of life. Nature is a fighting, biting, scratching thing that I need to combat. And I need to do it as violently as possible, because the more violence, the more I win. Clearly, this is not a good formula for man. Clearly, the more violence we apply, the more degraded we become. And there are so many people who say that a man is just an animal, and we see sometimes no difference. Maybe less. We don't see elephants arrange themselves with flags and combat another group of elephants and fight them to the finish. We only see this in man. Even though elephants have got the same trumpets, have got trumpets and equipment to declare war, they don't really arrange it in an organized way. Only we, supposedly superior people, do it. So, is there another way of looking at life? Is nature against us or in favor of us? Can we have the ability to control nature in the way we want? Well, yes, but we have to know what are the rules of nature. Gravity is useful for us when we lower a bucket into a well. But when we bring it up, we have to fight against it. So we have to learn to apply a certain level of horsepower when we bring it up and go with the flow when it gets let down. These are just the laws of nature. But by and large, nature allows us to do all of these things without any complication. But what's our particular role in it? So I very often give people a book, Florence Scovel Shinn, it's an old book, 1930s, called Game of Life. And so I have in front of me something, an extract from it. There is a place that you are to fill, and no one else can fill. Something you are to do which no one else can do. There's a perfect picture of this in the superconscious mind. Superconscious mind is yogic language being applied. The yoga arrangement or Sankhya arrangement of the psychology of the mind is to say 3 sections are available to us. Our normal conscious working, waking mind, we probably only apply about 5%. And then we find the unconscious of mind, that is where most of our activities take place, not only in automatic action, but also from memory, habit, a habit level. It's this habit level that has a drawing power for us and acts as a magnetic force. And then there's a superconscious mind that is not below, not sub this mind, but way above it and beyond it. Tapping into that, we get certain internal revelations about the universe around us and ultimately about the foundation for it. If there's a universe around it, a foundation must be there. If we notice that things are changing, we also have to notice by inference something unchanging in relation to it. So there's a perfect picture of this in the superconscious mind. It usually flashes across the conscious as an unattainable ideal, something too good to be true. In reality, it is man's true identity or destination, flashed to him from the infinite intelligence which is within himself. Many people, however, are in ignorance of their true destinies and are striving for things and situations which do not belong to them and would only bring failure and dissatisfaction if attained. And so the inference is this: there is something that you can do as an individual that nobody else can do, and is normally an assemblage of all your individual talents and abilities in the context of the field in which you automatically find yourself. And so we all operate in a field, and the Bhagavad Gita is to do with a field that's presented. Now we find we have not just one field, and I mentioned last week, we have multiple fields. But we have to internally shift our ideas until we identify which field is what. The most obvious external field is when you open your eyes. We are required to open our eyes because the person who normally does it is normally on holiday. So it's up to us. We open our eyes, and the world in front is what is presented to us, the field of activities. So these field activities are multiple in nature, and their characteristic is that they are ever changing, full of sounds and colors and experiences. And our reaction to that is an internal thing. Registering a multiplicity, we have a unit that makes a decision how to react, and we react to it. So every step you go becomes a field, and the whole field is the accumulation of the sum totality of fields. So the field of Kurukshetra is the field of our own endeavor. Now, there are many unpleasant things in it. Your life is not smooth. It's not meant to be smooth. We learned in the first chapter the value of how pain, we learn more lessons from it than from anything else, from pleasure. So it's a valuable thing. And the most acute and astute pain we can ever have is death, a bereavement. And if you study those experts in bereavement, you'll see there are certain stages we have to go through. The first thing is, I can't believe it. Next thing is, I can't believe it, and ultimately you get angry about it, and some people get angry with God and so on. But at the end of a whole process, a decision has to be made about our overall reaction. And Arjuna decides, has made his decision already. But he presents his argument in a systematic way, and we find this in the first chapter. But the second chapter, he continues it. Before he has a chance to do it, he asks a question. He turns to the Lord. And the Blessed Lord, just to remind you, says, "Whence has this unmanly, heaven-barring, shameful dejection come upon you at this juncture, O Arjun?" And the second stanza, also important, we covered these two last week. "Yield not, O Partha, to feebleness. It does not become you, it does not befit you. Cast off this this petty faint-heartedness. Wake up." And then he gives a confidence booster. "O vanquisher of foes, O scorcher, Parantapa, O scorcher of enemies." He puts it like that. See how he psychologically builds up a level of self-confidence, at the same time not agreeing with his intellectual defense and argument about his so-called moral position, "Thou shalt not kill." A soldier's job is to kill. A policeman's job is to arrest a robber and to direct traffic sometimes. You know, if you're going one way, say you're going one way, and you might say, "Yes, but I'm only going one way." So it requires a certain sensibility about it as well, and a sense of common good. You know, if I decide I'm going one way, everybody else is going the other way. They can't just turn around and say they're all wrong, I'm the only one that's right. There are some personalities who declare it. I'm the only one that's right. By way or the highway. So that would not be sensible. Yeah. There's some kind of phrase like that. If everything is coming at you, you're probably on the wrong side of the road. And so now it's Arjun's turn, and Arjun spends the next two stanzas declining to fight the revered ones, even though he is now resorted and taking refuge in the Lord. What is the lesson for us? Despite the fact that we have an intention of faith, we have an intention to trust in the goodness and security and loving warm embrace of the living Lord that sits with us constantly, is here, is now, is love. Despite all of the intentional thoughts that go on, we still maintain our own position and dig our heels in, dismissing any kind of divine trust. And so here's what Arjun says. Arjuna uvacha katham vishwam maham samke dhrolancha madhusudana ishubi pratyotsami puja ayishudana. Arjun said, "O slayer of Madhu," you're a slayer of Madhu. Yeah? I've decided to take a superior position and not slay anybody. O slayer of enemies, how shall I, with arrows, counterattack? Who? Never mind about anybody else on the field. Everybody else on the field we can easily deal with. But look who I'm seeing. Bhishma. Bhishma, my grandsire, the one who is the epitome of nobility and morality and goodness and truth. The one without a blemish. The one that decided to take a lifelong vow of celibacy just to keep his father happy. That Bhishma, if you read the Mahabharata, you'll understand what that story is about. And Drona, the supreme teacher, the priest who decides he will teach archery, the one who nurtures his students. And he says, how can I with arrows attack Bhishma and Drona, who are worthy of worship? So high are they in stature that they are worthy of not just admiration, but prostration. It's the Oriental habit to touch a person's feet, simulating removal of dust, or even prostrating before them. Children do it toward their parents, and students do it toward their teachers. Why? Because inside they see the Lord of the universe. It's not just reverence, it's not just respect, it's worship, worshiping the Lord of the universe in that form. And so, that is what he's saying. O Krishna, it befits one like you being adored as Madhusudana and as Arisudana, for your doing away with demons and sworn enemies, and all of that is justifiable. But this, I don't see anything justifiable about killing Bhishma and Drona. That's the problem I have. So then he continues. Gurun ahattahi mahan ubhavan seyo bhuktam bhaiksham apiha kor haloke Hatvarata kamamamstru kurun ihaiva bunjiya bhogan udira pradiktan actually. Okay. What is that about? The gurus, gurun ahattam, the gurus, instead of slaying ahattva, that is indeed the most noble. You see, he's making an argument. It is better to eat the beggar's bread. He's referring to withdrawing and becoming a sadhu, whose only livelihood is through begging. It's much better to stop being a military person and go and beg in the streets, like the sannyasis do. Sannyasis in the last stage of their life, from 75 years to 100, going off and sorry, I'm getting some interference. Yeah? Going off and getting food, begging food. It's much far better to do that, to degrade myself to that level and do that in the world than to slay these great souled masters. But if I kill them, here's my argument. The wealth that I will enjoy as a result, my enjoyment of wealth, and the desires in this world itself, they'll be stained with blood. How will I enjoy that if they're tainted with blood? That's my difficulty. Because Bhishma is truly the embodiment of continence and purity of. And chastity gets itself defined in this exemplary person. Now, we have to now hook this into the importance of what this chastity means and why Bhishma should be so revered as a result. Voluntarily giving up the normal procreative process. Why would you do that? Why would anybody do that? Why is it that in Christianity and certain sects of Sufism, why is it in Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism, that a person voluntarily decides to cut off the genetic line, to restrain themselves, to take all the energy that is normally there in the genetic programming, which is very subtle. We're not directly genetically programmed to procreate. It doesn't happen like that, as you know. For a woman, in the absence of men, you have to go and find a man. For a man, in the absence of women, you have to go and find a woman. Then the next thing is to make friends with them, have a conversation. And then the next thing is light some candles and have a romantic dinner. There's a whole ritual that is associated with it. And the rest I won't go into, I think you know. So why would somebody voluntarily cut that all off? That's a good question. It's because to get to the highest level of spiritual insight, yogic practice, all this energy has to be conserved and redirected. In the language of the yogis, it has to be awakened, the sushumna, and the language of Florence Scovel's Shilin that we just read, it's in the language of superconscious. The superconscious mind has to be opened up. And we can only do that if we take all the energy normally dispersed everywhere and redirect it in this way. And that is why somebody who has decided to do that is naturally somebody of high attainment, because all the avenues of the levels of consciousness start opening up as a result of this. And then what about the preceptor, Drona, who decides out of the sheer goodness, out of the welfare of humanity, to go and teach people his skills, not hold on to them, but share them. So that is why these two are held in high esteem, and why killing them, in Arjun's estimation, would be a very immoral and difficult thing to do. Na chetad vidma kataranno kariyo yadva jeme yadivano jayahu jan eva hatva na jijiva salmas devastite mukhe dratrashtra. Whether we should conquer them or they conquer us, I don't know which would be better. These very sons of Dhritarashtra stand before us, after slaying whom we should not care to live. I actually don't know. I don't know what is better. Whether they should kill us, we just stand here, let them kill us, or we should go and kill them. It's much of a muchness. So whichever way it is, I don't care. Best thing is just to go and withdraw. So then comes a section 7 to 8, and there we find a certain spiritual anguish, an anguish to do with conscience. So let's see what the process is. Despondency, justification, but the justification doesn't make the feeling go away. And then from justification, emotional anguish. Not just that we didn't weigh the pros and cons up properly, but I am in a dilemma because I have never shirked my duty. That's the dilemma. Now, why did I read about the specialness of people from the game of life? Is because in this, we have to find out what are we specifically suited to? What are we born for? What is our destiny, divine destiny? Put it in religious language, what is God's plan for us? How does He unfold His grace through us? How does He enact the drama with us as a player? That's the thing. So each one has an individual role to play, and the difficulty is, this is technically called Svatdharma, your own divine destiny, your own divine moral duty. And so obviously, if you go against it, you'll disrupt the whole flow of things, because it's like building a building and the roofer decides he's going to be a plumber. Now there's nobody else to do the roof. It's not going to work. So he's confessing in this way and saying, we don't know who we should conquer, who should conquer us, and so on and so forth. And then he expresses his anguish like that, this. Karpan yadoso pa daspavaha pachami tam dharmasam dumachita yachchreya shan nishitam bruhi tanme shishas deham sadimam tam prapanam. My nature, that is, my nature is overpowered. Karpanya dosha upahatas vabaha. My nature is weighed down with the taint of feeble-mindedness. My understanding is confused as to duty. I entreat you, that's how desperate I am. Say definitely, you decide what is good for me. I am your disciple. Do instruct me who have taken refuge in you. So here we are. Whenever there's a spiritual crisis, whenever there's a crisis, it's essentially a spiritual crisis. Because our destiny is spiritual. And whenever there's a spiritual crisis, what is the best thing to do? Resort to a teacher. Find a competent teacher. And there can be no greater teacher than a divine teacher. Somebody who has descended for this purpose, such as Sri Krishna, Jesus, Buddha, and so on. So, I don't know what to do. You know better. You instruct me, you tell me. What should I do? Now, at the back of it all, he's building an argument. He's already made a decision, actually. But he's saying, you tell me. So, his position is one of a kripana. And referring to man's strivings, of course, the Upanishad declares something. One thing is the good and quite another is the Katha Upanishad. One is Shreyas, one is Prayash. And the pleasant being of different requisitions, they both bind a person. And so the holy becomes the one that pursues the good. But the person who falls away from the goal chooses the pleasant. So it's a pleasant thing. It's a better option, seemingly, to get away from the situation than to engage in it. Now, how do we make this practical for us? We can recount the number of opportunities, great or small, where we are tempted, and sometimes do, withdraw from an awkward situation rather than face it. But it requires courage to face it. And strength and courage is the primary spiritual virtue that we need. So he's at this crossroads of prayers and shreyas. That's the whole idea. And so it's a kind of catastrophe. He's made the right move, that is, let me resort to divine intervention. The one that seeks to make a sacred study of this Bhagavad Gita, and the one who desires to translate its tenets into action will do very well, says this commentary, to chant this verse every time and to evoke in himself the attitude of self-surrender seen here in Arjuna. It's in fact a prayer complete in itself, making this prayer. So it starts off with this Kalpanya dosha upaha dasvapa bhavaha. With my nature overpowered by this taint of pity, Pachami, I ask from thee, with admitting that this mind is a confusion and asking what is the best thing, what is the shreya, the best thing to do. Now he also adds, I don't find any remedy to this grief. And not only that, but it's more than that, it's to set in dramatic tone. This grief parches my senses, makes them dry. Though I were to gain unrivaled prosperous monarchy on this earth and rule, or even sovereignty over the celestials, this would be the rewards of such a thing. Even though all of this I know, in principle, I still don't know what to do. So let's see. Now at this junction, we find, don't forget, this is a relay between Samjaya and Dhritarashtra. Yeah? So Samjaya picks this up. Samjaya uvacha ivam uktva shrishikesham kudakesham param tapaha na yotsya iti govindam uktva tushnim babhuvaha. After addressing the Lord of the senses thus, Gudakesha, the conqueror of sleep, the terror of the foes, submits to Govinda, I shall not fight in held silence. What is this Govindam? Govindam Uktva, having said, he turns thus iti to Govindam. The Govindam tells us about the know of the destiny of beings, because one that leads the cows, one that is a shepherd and says, come follow me. That is why that word is used. Now, against this background, of course, the chances are very remote of the war being called off. All the forces are assembled. You can't just say, all right, we call it a day. You know, they prepared well, they had their breakfast, everything, so everything is ready and they're ready to go. And so it's still fondly hoped by Dhritarashtra that things will stop. These, after all, are also his kinfolk. He doesn't want to see a war. Why doesn't he call a stop to it? Because he himself is weak and, as we know, blind. Not just a physical blindness, yes, but blind in every sense. So he's throwing that hint out. Now we find grace starting to flow here, and so Tam uvacha Rishikesha Pramahasam Ira Bharata Sanaya Ubhaya Madhye Vishi Dantam Idam Vacha. Bhava Bharata then smiling, as it were. What a beautiful passage. I mean, just picture it. The Lord's beautiful face and this terrible, terrible, stressful situation. And in great compassion, what does the Lord do? Smiles. So, O Bharata, then smiling, as it were, Rishikesha spoke these words. That is, the Lord spoke these words. The Lord of all the senses spoke these words to the desponding one placed between the two armies. So we can see the significance of the smile beaming on the lips of the Lord as the dawn of the harbinger of grace. There is nothing greater than Shreyas for man to seek the good. And so existence finds fulfillment in it. As long as we are prepared to say, let me submit to you, then grace flows. Can you see that? The Lord smiles on us when we yield. And when we resist, then things become difficult. So this divine smile on the lips of the Lord has great significance. Now the next stanza will tell us this simple message. What is yoga? Yoga is consistency. There has to be consistency. If you feel in any way out of balance and inconsistent, physically, psychologically, emotionally, it's not going to work. And so we have to practice consistency. In practice, spiritual practice, or in practicing to pass an exam, it's no good deciding that you'll go and study when you're in the mood. It's no good saying, oh, I'll get up and meditate when I feel like it. Or in the summer, I meditate very well, but in the winter, oh, it's far too cold. Or any of these things. These are excuses. And the only thing that you're doing is you're allowing the mind to run your life instead of the other way around. And we, of course, make that mistake. We say, I do this, I do that, I'm at fault, or I'm worthy of praise. But the real truth is, it's the mind. The mind is the one we superimposed an eye on. So let's find out how we can change the mind. And so, for now, having smiled, the Lord speaks. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Ashochan Anvosochastvam Pranavadhamscha Bhasase Gatasum Agatasumscha Na Nushochanti Panditaha. The Blessed Lord said a very significant thing. We would expect somebody of compassion to say, I understand your dilemma, so if you don't want to do it, don't do it. That's not what the Lord says. And he's talking about grief. We should all grieve. In a bereavement or an anticipated bereavement, Isn't it natural to grieve? But what is grief at the end of the day, put in a clinical way? It is the fact that we are attached to something, and when the attachment is severed, we feel pain. That's the fact of it. So what is Arjuna suffering from? Suffering from an attachment, even to noble people. You grieve for those who should not be grieved for. And yet you spout words of wisdom, means you seem to speak common sense. Your case seems reasonable, but it's not. The wise grieve neither for living nor for the dead. That seems very harsh. Somebody grieving, you shouldn't grieve. But you see, he says the wise. But who is wise? Very few people. So if you're wise, you won't grieve for the living or the dead. Never mind about the dead, you won't even grieve for the living. Somebody's suffering, you won't grieve for them. Somebody is suffering a bereavement, you won't grieve for them. Somebody passed away, you see the language we use, we couch it in beautiful terms. Passed away. See, my mother had a happy death. Those kinds of language we use because we don't really like this thing called death. We try and avoid it at all costs, but it still catches up with us. But why should the wise not grieve? Are they not human? So this is where philosophy now comes in. Because the basis for all of strength and stability will be how do you view this life? How do you view this body? How do you view this mind? How do you view your life and others' lives? The world, or the way of the world, is to classify people into the learned. But of course the Lord doesn't do it. It has nothing to do with scholarliness, not that kind of wisdom. And keeping the mind constant in all the eventualities in this way is the way of the wise. Sri Ramakrishna has this to say: speak out that only which is in your mind. Do not create conflict between word and deed. Nothing good comes from the disharmony of thought, word, and deed in oneself. There should be no conflict about it. Now, what is the basis for this lack of grief among the wise? It is one statement, and we do well to dwell on it, to meditate on it. It goes like this. Natveva atevamham chaturnasam natam me janadipaha nacheva na bhavishya shamaha sarvavayam ataparam. Nor I, nor you, nor any of these ruling princes was ever non-existent before, nor is it that we shall cease to be in the future. You repeat it. Nor I, nor you, nor any of these ruling princes in front was ever non-existent. There is no birth, no life, no death is the fact of it. Nor is it that we shall cease to be in the future. But that's not our common view. Our common view is we're born, we live, we die. We don't know how long we live for. We don't know, or we don't choose when we were born. And we have no idea when we'll die, and it's not only ourselves. The universe seems to have a birth and a life and a death, and we have no control over it. So this is going completely against it and saying, no, there is only existence. It looks like changes. It looks like birth. It looks like life. It looks like death. But actually, nothing comes and goes. Now here we have to use an example. So it's an example that you're all familiar with if you heard it from me before. So I'll pose a scenario. I suppose it's in story form, so you have to say once upon a time. There were cave people equipped with watches and equipped with notepads and paper and pens. They sat in a cave. Don't ask where all this is coming from. Where did these cave people get it? Had they even invented the wheel? No, we don't ask those questions. It's only a story. So they observe, they want to know, what is the sun? We have observed previously on previous occasions that the sun rises. We want to know what is the time that it rises. We want to monitor its evolution through the sky and see how big it grows. And we want to see when it reaches its peak. And we want to see when it starts diminishing. And ultimately we want to see when is it dying, and then we'll see maybe it reincarnates. Is there any post-sun somewhere? So faithfully, when the sun rises, let's say 6 o'clock in the morning, they faithfully record Mr. Sun was born. Wasn't born as a giant, wasn't born as a brilliant thing, was only born as a small smattering of colors in the sky to start off with. And then we noticed there was an orb that came, something very orange came, and it started spreading its rays, and we noticed everything started to light up. And then we noticed it rose, physically rose in the sky, and became bigger and bigger and bigger. And in Africa, we think that it is at midday. Here is different in Ireland, because at 12 o'clock noon, the sun is somewhere angular in the sky somewhere. That's the highest it gets. Anyway, for our purposes, these people lived in Africa. So they noticed how the sun at midday reached its zenith. They said, this must be middle age, because they must have been middle-aged cave people. And then as we go on, you see it's diminishing, more and more and more. It's getting into old age. And then they faithfully record, we regret to announce at 6 o'clock this evening, poor Mr. Sun died. But let's go into our cave and let us discuss whether there's an afterlife and whether in fact it incarnates and reincarnates. And then in the morning, they're delighted to announce, good news, Mr. Sun reincarnated. So the truth of the matter was, the Sun was never born. It never became old, never went into teenagehood. It was never middle age. It never got old. It never died. None of these took place. And it never reincarnated. It's only our limited view of things that make it like that. So we look at things from a wrong point of view because we can't see the total picture. Now with the advance of astronomy, we can see it better. We used to have a geocentric view of things. We used to think that everything revolved around us. And then as we got better and better vision and better observation, we thought that it was the sun that was the furthest thing away, and we all revolved around it. And then we discovered that there are other bodies, and there are other planets, and finally there are other galaxies. We thought not so long ago this was the only galaxy that was there. And then we saw multiple galaxies all over the place. Imagine. So things are not what they seem. And the truth of the matter is, not only through revelation, but through philosophical analysis, that there's an existent entity betrayed in our language. I exist. There's nobody who ever says I do not exist. So everybody declares I exist. You can doubt anything else except I exist. There's some existent entity that doesn't come and go when the body comes and goes. And when the whole assemblage of your experiences along with it comes and goes, some entity remains. And the arguments from the Upanishads range from the 3 states of consciousness, curiously omitted from this Bhagavad Gita. But the 3 states of consciousness mentioned in many different places, with one Upanishad solely dedicated to it, to the subject. That if we want to experience death, we don't have to go very far. Every night we have a dress rehearsal for it. We vacate the premises that we have here with our egoistic stamp, I am this, I am that, this is my bank account and my relatives. And we enter into another world where the dreamer and the dream is the same thing. And then all that multiplicity of egos disappears until there's one without a second. There's nothing else. There's no time, no space, no duality, no this and no that. So that is the statement which is here. And it's backed up again by this, Dehinosmin yata dehe kamaram yovanam jara tata dehantaraptir dhirash tatra namuhyati. As the indweller of this body experiences all these phases, childhood, youth, and old age in the body, he also passes on to another body. The serene one is not affected thereby. Now we have the doctrine of transmigration laid out. So even if you think that you will die, don't worry, another body awaits you. Why? Because your central purpose is not complete. If there's a central purpose in life, why would it be thwarted just because this body is fragile? And because this assemblage of cells, something assembled together, will naturally disintegrate. If it's assembled, it'll fall apart. That's the rule, isn't it? You can't hold on to your car forever, no matter how many NCTs it passes. It just doesn't work. At some stage or other, your car will break down. This car will break down, and sometimes it doesn't break down, sometimes it has an accident. And that's just all there is to it. But why would you stop your journey, is the argument. So we see all these phases. We see that we are physically different, even mentally, emotionally different from when we were 5 years of age, some of you. And then and then going up, we see that there are changes. 10 years ago you could do this, 10 years later you can't do that. Some people decide, no, we'll play rugby forever. And good luck to them, that's fine. But in 10 years, 20 years, you might still play rugby, but with a Zimmer frame. So there's no permanence in this life. That's the fact of it. Now this is very fundamental philosophy. But what does our gut say? Our gut doesn't say anything about this permanence. Well, it does at a very deep level because we know we exist and we can never imagine that we will die. No matter how hard you do it, you can sit and create an image. Okay, imagine now this body is on a slab and everybody is mourning and the undertaker is coming and removing the innards and so on. You are still the observer of it, isn't it? You're still looking at it like a movie. So try and imagine that you yourself are dead, annihilated completely. It's not a possibility. So it's betrayed in all our fundamental, deep understandings and attitudes that we will never die. But it comes out in a distorted way because we think the body, will never die. And we were saying some weeks back how the story of Yudhishthira there in the Mahabharata and how he correctly answered the ghost's proposition to him or question, what is the greatest paradox in man? And then the decision was that death will occur to our neighbors, will occur to our friends, maybe even our family, but not to us. And the ones we are attached to is the greatest shock. That's the difficulty. So there's an indweller. See the language. Dehinaha, the embodied soul. An entity stands there and it's inside a body or a city. Kathopanishad labels it 11-gated city. Here the Bhagavad Gita puts it as 9. It eliminates 2 of the gates. That's all right. 9-gated city, 11-gated city belonging to one that is unborn, ajna, unborn and undying and unchanging, avakra, unchanging, unflickering consciousness. Consciousness because some entity must be there to experience all these phases and changes. You must have noticed that if something changes and moves from A to B, you must be stationary. And Einstein noticed this and gave us special relativity. So though this internal self that we call Atman is imperishable, does he not subject himself to heat and cold and pleasure and pain and all those kinds of experiences is a good question. And the answer comes in 2 stanzas. feelings that pertain to the body. It goes like this. Matras parsastu kantaya shitoshna sukha dukkadaha agamma paino nitya tam titikshasra bharata. The contacts of the senses with their objects create, O son of Kunti, feelings of heat and cold, of pain and pleasure. They come and go and are impermanent, and we have to bear them patiently. If you can't change it, then you have to bear it. You'll learn that as you get older and pain increases in various ways, that titiksha, forbearance, is necessary. It's one of the 6 treasures that contributes towards studentship. How do you become a good student? Well, one of the qualities is titiksha, forbearance, a kind of internal strength that is there, not buffeted by any pairs of opposites. If it's hot or cold, so be it. It is how it is. Heat and pleasure, it is as it is. Psychologically, pleasure and pain, don't react. Accept it with an element of patience and forbearance. Patience is one of the fundamental spiritual characteristics. Purity, patience, perseverance, these are the 3 qualities. Then the question arises, but then how does such a one become fit for enlightenment? And the answer comes, Yam hi na vyata yante ete purusham purushor sada samadukha sukham dhiram somrata tvaya kalpate. That man, or the best of men, is fitted for immortality, whom these do not torment, who is balanced in pain and pleasure and steadfast. That person, and you are the best of men, see how he's building up the confidence, self-confidence, is fitted for immortality. We don't experience the immortality, we know it in principle. Thou art immortal. Thou art a child of immortality, says Shrita Shrutara Upanishad. We know it intellectually, in principle. But if we are fitted for the sense of immortality, which is the aim of man, when all these things torment us, how and who is fit for it? It's one who is balanced in all of these pairs of opposites, with all these vicissitudes, pleasure and pain, and steadfast. I think I told you about Swami Shardananda, isn't it? He was very known to have a very calm temperament. So he was with a friend on a boat, and it was rocking violently, and they were threatened to be overwhelmed and dumped into the sea or into the river. And he was with a friend who was a doctor, and Shardananda was puffing on a pipe, and everybody was getting agitated except him, because he had this forbearance, this even-mindedness in all circumstances. They said, why aren't you agitated? Aren't you worried? He says, if we get dumped into the water, then I'll start worrying. Well, what's the point of worrying until then? See? So we spend a lot of energy wasted in anxiety because we haven't got this acceptance. And along with acceptance is also a sense of contentment. And along with contentment comes a sense of thankfulness. I'm thankful for here, for now. I don't have to worry about later. How does Jesus express it? The birds of the air.
They neither sow nor do they reap. Yet their heavenly Father feeds them.
Feeds them. And the lilies of the field?
They neither toil nor spin, yet Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these.
There we are. Okay? So why should we be concerned? Why should we worry? All right? Now, Sri Ramakrishna makes this contribution also. But before that, sorry, we go back here. Yeah. All right. So we have to make this distinction between what is real, what is unreal. And this first step is called viveka, discernment, discrimination. That's our first step. To understand this is our first step. The one thing necessary has been issued. Weakness does not become you. Don't yield to it. Remain firm and strong and steadfast in the face of all vicissitudes on the basis that you exist and you're never born and you never die. You will never cease to be, nor will others cease to be. Now we have to look into, inquire into the nature of this real and unreal. And so we have 4 stanzas related to it. Nasato vidyato bhavo nabhavo vidhiti sataha ubayo api drishto nantas dvamayos tatvadashipihi. The unreal has no existence. The real never exists to be, ceases to be, and the truth about both has been realized by the seers. Tattva darshana is seeing into the reality of these things and being to have a correct understanding of things about them. Well, what we normally take a switch. That means we think that things that are solid and real, we take them in this way, but they're unreal in the sense that they're impermanent. They come and they go. They have a characteristic of existence and non-existence, according to moments. So I mentioned, I'm not sure whether I mentioned this last week or to some other people, but in the old days, with cars, if you wanted to indicate left or right, you turned a switch and something shot out from the side.
Morris Minor, wasn't
No,
it?
Morris Minor.
Ching.
Yeah, ching, yeah. So you had an indicator. How on earth anybody could see it, I don't know. But there it is. So you took pot luck and you hoped everybody would see it and you turned the corner. And nowadays, of course, we have a flashing light. Supposing you're from that era and you never knew about the flashing light that we call a car indicator. And then you ask, please tell me, is this working? Go to the front of the car. I want to test it. I have my NCT coming up. Please test whether this is working. And you get the report. Thumbs up. Yes. No. Yes. No. As it goes on, it's yes when it comes on. It's no when it goes off. Does it exist? Yes. And now, no. This second, does it exist? Yes. Where's it gone? Oh. Life is like that. But we don't notice it. Why? Because it's a bit like sitting in a movie house. When you watch a movie, it's a selection of individual pictures run at such a speed. The eye doesn't catch the individuality of it. It only catches the sequence of it. It catches the continuum of it. We look and see this thing is moving. You must have known when you were small how you draw a stick figure with arm like this and the next thing like that, next thing like that. You run it in a series. The person looks as if the arms are waving or a person is running. But when you run it so rapidly, the eye can't catch it. And so the eye sends a report and the brain responds. Oh, I see it's flowing. I see it's going from A to B. And it's going within a certain time at a certain speed. But it's not. It's not like that. It's just if you slow that movie down, it'll be a series of individual things, individual segments, slotted into the minutest quantity of time that maybe we could call a second. It's probably even more as of a split moment than a second. So that's how we view the normal world. We don't view it as it is. We make that mistake. We see the world as something that is permanent, and we make the mistake. We see that I am this body, and we make the mistake. We don't make it about a car. We only make it about this earth car called a body. So we make this mix-up with the psychophysical entity, and we label it I, and God and nature allows us to carry it. But it gives us problems. So it's necessary to have this discernment. What is real? What is unreal? What is permanent? What is impermanent? What is enduring? What is not enduring? What is worth investing in? What is not? What gives us ultimate joy and what ultimately gives us pain. We know that attachment gives us pain. We know that pairs of opposites, if not properly attended to, gives us pain if we go with the pleasure and resist the pain. And every pleasure has a sequence of pain. So when we want to have ice cream, then when we finish with the ice cream, we want more. There's a down. And then when we come up, we have a down and we never finish it. So all of our desires gives us miseries, and later on in the Bhagavad Gita, the question is asked, why does this all happen? And it's down to desires. And where does desires come from? It comes from Rajaguna. Now, there's a whole chapter in the Bhagavad Gita dedicated to the gunas, but it's mentioned periodically, and we have to resort to Sankhya way of looking at things to understand. And all philosophical areas agree with this analysis, that there are primarily three evolutionary forces at work. And we can put it in this way, that there is in the universe something that hides the reality and truth of what is here, something that covers it, and ultimately something that reveals it. We want the revealing factor, and if we're to cultivate the revealing factor, we have to start off with this process of discernment. What value should we place on something that doesn't endure? And so all our Eastern philosophy, whether it's Sankhya, whether it's Vedanta, whether it's yoga, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Jainism, has this one characteristic, that what we see as the world is made from fleeting moments. And the fleeting moments, one aspect, the other aspect is it's a compound of things, of an assemblage of parts knitted together, which ultimately will disintegrate. Knowing that, we have to see what is that central entity that doesn't get a combination, that has no evolving parts, and that never changes. That is what we call Atman. And so because of delusion of the earthly relationship between Arjun and those people opposite, he loses this discrimination. And he chooses to recoil from what is really a righteous war, his actual duty. And so that is why earlier Krishna says, it ill behoves him to abandon his duty. And so the Lord's point of view is, he exhorts him, fight therefore, O Bharata. And this exhortation can be found not just once, but time and time again. This is the burden of the Gita. Sri Ramakrishna, when asked, what is the purport of the Gita, says, repeating the Gita gives you tyaga, renunciation, detachment. We only get that when we've got that discrimination, discernment. Yainam veti hantaram yaschainam manyate hatam ubauthau now vijanito na yam hanti na hanyate. He who holds Atman as a slayer, and he who considers it as the slain, both of them are ignorant. It slays not, nor is it slain. The Atman is neither born nor does it die. It coming into being and ceasing to be do not take place in it. Unborn, eternal, constant, and ancient, is not killed when the body is slain. And we pick this up next week now. So we go on then, we'll repeat that last stanza because it's important and make a commentary on it. And then we'll go on to whether it's a good idea to be attached to action that is not associated with this Atman. But just to preempt that to some extent, a small quotation from Sri Ramakrishna. Absorbed as the saint was, he tells a story, he was passing along a crowded street. Then by chance he trampled upon a foot of a wicked man. That ruffian became enraged and recklessly assaulted the holy man until he fainted and fell down. He was forthwith carried to the ashram and tenderly nursed by his disciples. And when he regained consciousness, he was asked if he could recognize the one attending on him. What does he say? The hand that beat up this body is now nursing it, came the reply. The knower of Brahman, that is the ultimate principle, distinguishes not the assaulter from the the assaulter from the assaulted. We'll pick this up next week. Om Shanti, 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 Shanti.